Welcome to the deep dive. We gather up stacks of fascinating source material and then we break it all down, distilling the most crucial insights just for you. Today we're setting off on, well, a truly epic journey. We're exploring what I think has to be one of humanity's most profound and honestly maybe one of the most perplexing inventions ever. Money. What if I told you its story isn't really just about coins and currency? That it's actually about this incredibly powerful idea, an idea that shapes our societies, builds empires, and even now is fundamentally redefining what it means to be human. We're taking a really in-depth look today. You could call it eine Geschichte des Geldes, a real history of money, tracing it from its earliest forms right up to its surprising, almost sci-fi algorithmic future.
Indeed. And our sources, they paint this really compelling picture. How humanity went from just exchanging simple favors within a small group to trading complex data across the globe. From, the value locked in a cocoa bean to the completely unseen flow of computer bits. This deep dive is going to reveal money not merely as, say, an economic tool, but as this deep psychological and social construct. It's a force that has continually reshaped how we interact, our values, and ultimately who we are, right up to this very moment and well into a future we're still trying to grasp. It's a story much bigger than just ledgers and transactions.
Okay, let's start this journey. Not in some dusty bank vault maybe, but somewhere far more dramatic. Let's go to the heart of the Aztec Empire, 1519, the arrival of Hernán Cortés. Now the Aztecs, they were a people entirely unfamiliar with the whole Afro-Asian world the Spaniards came from. And they noticed something that just puzzled them deeply. The Spanish had this, quote, extraordinary interest in a certain yellow metal, gold. To the Aztecs, gold was beautiful, sure, good for making exquisite jewelry, maybe even for ceremonial dust in some exchanges, but their main currency, that was cocoa beans, or sometimes intricately woven cloth. They simply couldn't get their heads around the Spanish obsession. And when they actually asked Cortés why this metal held such sway over him and his men, his answer was, well, chillingly stark. He said, because I and my companions suffered from a disease of the heart which can be cured only with gold. That's a really striking image, isn't it, of this deep, almost desperate obsession.
It absolutely is. And what's truly fascinating about that quote, about Cortés' confession, is that this disease of the heart for gold, it wasn't just his crew. As our sources suggest, it was basically an epidemic. It had swept across the entire Afro-Asian world where the Spaniards came from. It's really a testament to money's extraordinary power that even, bitter enemies, think Christians and Muslims during the really brutal wars in Iberia, they lusted after the exact same useless yellow metal. I mean, despite waging these incredibly bloody religious wars, devastating lands, committing atrocities in the name of Christ or Allah, they found common ground. They accepted each other's currency. You'd find Christian conquerors, for instance, minting coins they called mileres. And these coins had flowing Arabic script right on them, declaring, there is no God except Allah and Muhammad is Allah's messenger. Even Catholic bishops issued these. And, God-fearing Christians happily used them without a second thought. Why? Because they knew it could buy them bread or a new sword or whatever they needed. So this early example, it powerfully illustrates money's just unique ability to transcend these deeply held, even warring cultural and religious beliefs. It really highlights money as this universal translator, creating a shared reality, facilitating cooperation, even when everything else about their interaction was defined by conflict. It's almost this paradoxical force for unity right in the middle of division.
That's a truly profound insight. So right from the beginning, money was acting as this incredible, almost amoral, universal translator, bridging divides even among sworn enemies. But that brings up a really fundamental question, doesn't it? How did we even get to that point? What core problem was money solving in the first place? Because it's almost impossible for us now to imagine a world without it. But there definitely was a time before money as we know it, a time when life wasn't governed by gold or even cocoa beans.
Exactly. And to understand where money came from, we really need to step back, way back to humanity's early days. For the vast, vast majority of our history, hunter-gatherer bands, they largely operated on what our sources call an economy of favors and obligations. Think of it like a tightly knit family or a very close community. Everyone hunted, everyone gathered, everyone made pretty much everything they needed themselves. If you shared a piece of meat from a successful hunt, you wouldn't expect an immediate equivalent return. It was more like building up this diffuse social credit. You might expect maybe free medical assistance down the line if you got sick, or perhaps help building a shelter later on. These were small, really intimate communities. Everyone knew everyone else. Reciprocity was just inherent, almost unspoken. There was very little need for complex, formal exchange with strangers because most needs were met right there within the band. And, rare items acquired from outside, they were probably bartered simply, maybe for something decorative, not a life necessity.
Right. And what's really crucial to understand is that even the agricultural revolution, I mean, for all its monumental changes, it didn't immediately create this pressing need for complex money. For a long time after farming started, most people still lived in these small, pretty self-sufficient villages, much like the hunter-gatherer bands, just, slightly larger and more settled. You knew the shoemaker, you knew the local healer, and you just continued to exchange favors or goods directly, like, I'll help you with your harvest if you mend my roof. Still very personal. But here's where the wheels of change really started to turn, with the gradual rise of larger cities, early kingdoms, and alongside that, improvements in transport, even just better roads or bigger boats, came this critical development: specialization. Suddenly you had full-time shoemakers who were truly masters of their craft, dedicated doctors, even vintners in one specific village, making truly exceptional wine. And it just made more sense. Why drink mediocre local wine if you could trade for a superior variety from elsewhere? Somewhere the climate and soil were perfect for it. Or why make your own crude pots if a specialist potter in the next valley could make stronger, more beautiful ones? This professional honing of expertise, it was incredibly beneficial for everyone, raising the overall quality of life.
And that specialization, while incredibly efficient for production, fundamentally broke the old economy of favors model, the model that had served humanity for so long. You simply couldn't rely on reciprocal favors with large numbers of strangers in a bustling market town. Why? Because you didn't know them. They might never return the favor, or you might just never see them again. And this brings us right to the critical limitations of direct barter. It's often romanticized, but in practice, it was. Well, a nightmare. Imagine you're an apple grower. You produce the crispest, sweetest apples in the entire province. But your shoes, they're completely worn out. So you trek to the market town, eager to trade for new footwear. You find a shoemaker, but then the haggling starts. The shoemaker hesitates. Okay, how many apples for a pair of sturdy boots? The value of apples varies by season, by ripeness, and so does the quality of other goods. People might offer him wheat, maybe goats, maybe even legal advice. The shoemaker might have last traded apples for some small women's slippers, and these are big man-sized boots. And leather prices are up, maybe because some mysterious disease decimated the local flocks, making good skins really scarce. In a complex barter economy, every single day, buyers and sellers would need to know thousands, maybe even hundreds of thousands of different exchange rates. Just think, for only 100 commodities, that's almost 5,000 different rates you need to know. For 1,000 commodities, it's nearly 500,000. It's an information overload so vast it would make complex trade virtually impossible. It's a system basically designed for stagnation, not for growth or dynamism.
And it gets even more complicated than that. Even if you somehow miraculously figured out the exchange rate, there's the infamous double coincidence of wants. What if the shoemaker just doesn't want apples right now? What if he's really, really longing for a divorce? So, okay, you then have to find a lawyer who happens to love apples. And then on top of that, you need to hope that that lawyer needs a haircut from someone who happens to want a divorce. It's this utterly impossible, almost comedic dance of mutual desire. Some societies, like the Soviet Union, they attempted to implement these central barter systems, but they largely failed. Human nature kind of kicked in. People would work as little as possible and grab as much as they could. It led to inefficiency and shortages. More moderate experiments, like maybe in the Inca Empire, they were a bit more successful for certain goods, but still inherently limited in scope and dynamism. So it became abundantly clear humanity needed a far more elegant, more universal solution to connect all these specialized experts and facilitate trade effectively. The stakes for society actually advancing were incredibly high.
And the solution was precisely that. What our sources call a purely mental revolution, the invention of money itself. It wasn't a technological breakthrough like, say, the wheel or discovering fire. It was a conceptual leap, a huge one. Money is, quite simply, anything at all, that people are collectively willing to use to systematically represent the value of other things. Specifically for the purpose of exchange, it allows us to compare values quickly and easily, to exchange goods and services seamlessly, and to store wealth in a convenient, portable form. At its very core, it's a concept. An intersubjective reality, meaning it's real only because we collectively agree it's real, even if it has no inherent physical value itself. It exists solely in our shared human imagination. This incredible mental leap allowed for the development of economic systems far more complex, far more efficient, and far more dynamic than anything that had existed before.
And this money, it wasn't always the shiny coins or crisp banknotes we think of today, which I think is such a crucial point to remember. Our sources highlight this incredible variety that has served as currency throughout history. You've got cowrie shells, livestock, animal skins, salt, grain, beads, finely woven cloth, even promissory notes scrawled on clay tablets. Cowrie shells, for instance, were astonishingly widespread. They were used for about 4,000 years across vast regions of the world: Africa, South Asia, East Asia, Oceania. And what's truly remarkable, they were still accepted for tax payments in British Uganda in the early 20th century. What's even crazier, even in really desperate circumstances like modern prisons or prisoner of war camps, objects as simple as cigarettes often serve as money. An Auschwitz survivor vividly described their currency, the cigarette. The price of every article was stated in cigarettes.
Yes.
Even non-smokers accepted them because they knew they could be converted into something else they needed. And if we just fast forward to today, the physical reality of money has almost vanished.
Over 90% of the world's money, we're talking more than $50 trillion, exists only as electronic data on computer servers. Compare that to less than $6 trillion in actual physical coins and banknotes. It's safe to say, yeah, only criminals are buying houses with suitcases full of paper money anymore. Most transactions are just electronic data flitting between accounts, which is in many ways even better than physical cash later, less bulky, instantly traceable.
Exactly. That ease of use being lighter, less bulky, more easily tracked, quickly transferred, that's precisely why money became indispensable for complex commercial systems to really flourish. It simplifies trade immensely. Imagine our poor shoemaker from earlier. In a money economy, they only need to know the price of various shoes in one standardized currency. There's no need to memorize complex exchange rates with apples or goats or legal advice. Money also liberates the apple expert. They don't need to search for a shoemaker who also happens to crave apples right now, because everyone always wants money, knowing they can universally convert it into whatever they desire. Money, then, has these three fundamental qualities. First, it's universal convertibility. It lets us turn almost anything into almost anything else. Think of a discharged soldier converting his brawn, his military service, into brain by financing college tuition with military benefits, or a physician converting health or medical fees into justice by hiring a lawyer, or even, as our sources rather provocatively suggest, a 15th century prostitute converting sex into salvation by buying indulgences from the Catholic Church. Secondly, it lets us store wealth conveniently. You can't really store time or beauty. Strawberries last only a short while. Grain is durable, yeah, but it requires huge guarded storehouses, susceptible to rats, mold, fire. But cowrie shells, gold, or computer bits, they don't rot. They're unpalatable to vermin, and they fit safely into a strongbox or, a digital ledger. Finally, money solves the problem of transporting wealth. A wealthy farmer emigrating can't take his house and his rice paddies with him, but he can sell them for, say, a sack of cowrie shells or gold dust that he can easily carry across provinces or even oceans. Without money, global commercial networks would just remain extremely limited in size and complexity and dynamism. It fundamentally hindered the development of vast civilizations before money really took hold.
Okay, so if money isn't inherently valuable, if cowrie shells are just shells and dollar bills are just, as you say, psychological constructs, basically figments of our collective imagination, then why on earth are we willing to exchange, fertile rice paddies or dedicate our lives to flipping hamburgers or sell health insurance, all for what is essentially colored paper or electronic data? What makes this incredibly abstract concept actually work? How does it become the backbone of global commerce? It sounds almost too fragile, too dependent on mass delusion maybe, to function with such incredible power.
You've hit on the absolute core of it: trust. Trust is the raw material from which all money is minted. We're willing to accept money because we fundamentally trust that other people will also accept it in exchange for whatever we want or need later on. It's this vast, intricate system of mutual trust, and arguably, it's the most universal and efficient one ever devised by humanity. Now, this trust isn't simple or superficial. It's built on a very complex, very long-term network of political, social, and economic relations. I believe in a dollar bill because my neighbors believe in it, and they believe in it because I do. And we all believe in it because our government demands it for taxes, and maybe our priest even demands it in tithes. That familiar phrase, "in God we trust," on a US dollar bill, it's actually a really profound testament to this deeper, interwoven, almost spiritual level of trust that's required for money to function. This crucial role of trust also explains why financial crises are so often triggered not just by, purely economic factors, but by political developments or just a sudden collective loss of confidence. The stock market, for instance, can fluctuate wildly based on nothing more than collective sentiment, because ultimately money is belief made manifest.
That's a powerful explanation. And I get that this trust wasn't always purely abstract, right?
Yeah.
Initially, when the first real currencies emerged, People didn't have this widespread abstract trust in just a symbol.
Right.
So early money had to possess some kind of inherent value itself.
Exactly. Our sources take us back to Sumerian barley money around 3000 BC. It appeared alongside the invention of writing, really to meet these intensifying administrative and economic needs of early cities. Fixed amounts of barley, precisely measured in silas, that was about 1 liter, were used as a universal currency. Salaries were paid in barley. A male laborer might earn 60 silas a month. A foreman could earn up to 5,000 silas a month.
Wow.
Yeah, far more than he could possibly eat. So he'd use the surplus to buy other things. Oil, goats, maybe even slaves. It was a tangible commodity you could actually eat. But imagine trying to buy a shirt today with a sack of barley. Vendors would probably call security.
Right.
It was difficult to store, difficult to transport. The real breakthrough then came when people started trusting money that lacked that intrinsic use value, but was just much, much easier to handle and manage.
Okay, so what was that breakthrough?
That breakthrough was the silver shekel in ancient Mesopotamia. It emerged around the mid-3rd millennium BC. Now, a silver shekel wasn't a coin as we know it. It was a precisely measured weight, 8.33 grams of silver. Hammurabi's code, for example, specifies payments in set amounts of silver, not pre-minted coins. Joseph's brothers, in the famous biblical story, they sold him for 20 silver shekels, about 166 grams of silver. Now, unlike barley, silver isn't for eating or drinking or making tools. Its value is purely cultural. Prized for jewelry, maybe status symbols. You can't sustain yourself with silver. The crucial point here is that people learned to trust it without it having intrinsic utility. That was the conceptual leap. This then paved the way for the first true coins. They appeared around 640 BC, minted by King Alyattes of Lydia in what's now Western Anatolia. These coins had standardized weights of gold or silver and, crucially, an identification mark. That mark served 2 really important purposes. First, it certified the metal content, guaranteeing its purity and weight. And second, it identified the authority of the king who was guaranteeing it. This solved the huge problem of having to weigh metal every single time you made a transaction, or laboriously checking its purity.
Yeah.
The king's signature on a coin was essentially a public promise. And counterfeiting, that became a grave crime of lèse-majesty, a direct attack on the king himself. It was punished severely, usually by torture and death, because it fundamentally undermined this essential trust. Trust in his power, his integrity, and thus trust in the currency itself.
Wow. And the trust placed in these standardized coins like the Roman denarius, it became incredibly potent. It was so strong that they were accepted and valued even far, far beyond the Roman Empire's borders. Our sources tell us that Indian markets, thousands of kilometers away from the nearest Roman legion, they happily used denarii. Local rulers all across the known world even started imitating the emperor's portrait on their own coins because they recognized the inherent power and acceptance of that symbol. The very name denarius evolved into dinar, which is a currency term still used in many countries today: Jordan, Iraq, Serbia. This gospel of gold and silver, as the sources call it, it spread from the Mediterranean out to the Indian Ocean, and eventually from Europe to the far corners of the earth, gradually weaving together this single global monetary zone. People speaking entirely different languages, obeying different rulers, worshiping distinct gods, they all converged on this shared belief. Gold and silver is the ultimate store of value. Without this shared, profound belief, the vast global trade networks we know today would have been utterly impossible. Think about the gold and silver the conquistadors found in America. Much of it didn't even stay in Spain. It flowed directly into the global economy, enabling European merchants to buy silk, porcelain, spices in East Asia. It drove economic growth and cultural exchange across continents. Most of that American gold, surprisingly, actually ended up in Chinese purses eventually, really underscoring this global flow.
And this shared belief, even among such disparate cultures, it can be elegantly explained by just the fundamental forces of supply and demand. And, well, the logic of human desire. If gold, for instance, was relatively worthless in India but highly coveted in the Mediterranean, merchants would naturally buy it cheaply in India and sell it dearly in the Mediterranean. This arbitrage would pretty quickly equalize its value across regions. The mere fact that other people want it is enough to make us value it too. In a really profound sense, money represents the apogee of human tolerance. That's a striking phrase from the sources. It's more open-minded, less judgmental than language or laws or religious beliefs. Money bridges almost any cultural gap. It doesn't discriminate based on religion, gender, race, age, sexual orientation. It enables complete strangers, people who might even despise each other on a personal level, to cooperate effectively and efficiently towards shared economic goals. While religion asks us to believe in something transcendent, maybe something unseen, money asks us to believe that other people believe in something tangible, yet fundamentally abstract. It's an incredible act of collective faith when you think about it.
That is a truly striking thought, money, as the apogee of human tolerance. Enabling cooperation across every divide. It sounds incredibly positive, doesn't it? A powerful testament to our capacity for collective action. But here's where the narrative takes a really crucial, maybe darker turn, one that reveals a shadow side. Our sources suggest that these seemingly benign principles, universal convertibility, mutual trust, they have a very real and often devastating dark side. When everything can be systematically represented by money, when everything becomes convertible, and trust depends solely on anonymous coins or digital data, it can, over time, start to corrode local traditions, intimate personal relations, even deeply held human values. It slowly, almost imperceptibly, replaces them with the cold, impersonal laws of supply and demand. It's not just about grand historical shifts. It feels like it's about a very personal erosion of what makes us human sometimes.
Indeed, it's a stark reality. Human communities have always been built on things we consider priceless, things like honor, loyalty, morality, love, family bonds, community ties. These are values that, by definition, shouldn't be bought or sold. Even if the market were to offer an excellent price for them, certain things our sources emphasize just aren't done. Or shouldn't be. Parents mustn't sell their children into slavery. A devout Christian must not commit a mortal sin. Ancestral tribal lands should never be sold to foreigners, but money, like water relentlessly seeping through cracks in a dam. It has always sought to breach these barriers, always pushing the boundaries of what is considered acceptable trade. We see tragic instances throughout history, parents forced to sell children into slavery just to buy food for their remaining family, devout Christians committing murder and cheating, then using their ill-gotten spoils to buy forgiveness, indulgences from the church, ambitious knights auctioning their allegiance to the highest bidder, and ancestral tribal lands, sacred to generations, being sold to foreigners from the other side of the world for, essentially, a ticket into the burgeoning global economy. And this isn't just about individual moral failings, it's about the systemic pressure that money itself exerts. It creates a universal trust, yes, but this trust is increasingly placed in the money itself, and the impersonal systems backing it, not necessarily in fellow humans or in sacred values. When money becomes the ultimate go-between, the ultimate mediator, the world is, as one source warns, in danger of becoming one big and rather heartless marketplace, where everything has a price and perhaps nothing is truly priceless anymore.
That's a chilling prospect. So money helps us cooperate and build, but it simultaneously has this power to corrode our most fundamental values.
Yeah.
This incredibly complex, often contradictory relationship, it really comes into its own with the dawn of the modern economy, which, our sources argue, can basically be summed up in one powerful overarching word: growth. For the vast majority of human history, economies stayed relatively static in size. Global production might increase, sure, maybe due to more people or more land being cultivated, but per capita production, the average amount of wealth generated per person, remained largely unchanged, stuck in a kind of zero-sum game thinking. Then suddenly everything changed. In 1500, global production was estimated at around $250 billion. Today, it stands at approximately $60 trillion.
Wow.
Yeah. And per capita production skyrocketed from about $550 a year to $8,800 a year. It's an absolutely stupendous exponential growth that just transformed human civilization. So what accounts for this truly stupendous growth? What was the magic ingredient?
The absolute key to this explosive growth is a revolutionary new system. One based on a profound trust in the future, what we now simply call credit. Before the modern era, money could primarily only represent things that actually existed right here, right now, in the present. This severely limited economic growth because it made it incredibly difficult to finance new, ambitious enterprises, things that didn't have immediate, tangible assets to back them up. Imagine a baker. Let's call her Jane McDonald again. She has this brilliant dream for a new, state-of-the-art bakery, but she has no tangible resources now. The only way she could possibly build it back then would be to find a contractor willing to work today and patiently wait for payment years later, if and when the bakery finally starts making money. Such contractors were, as our sources aptly put it, pretty rare breeds.
Understandably.
Right. Humanity was essentially trapped in this predicament for millennia. But the modern era introduced this radical idea, representing imaginary goods, future production, future wealth with a special kind of money: credit. Credit then allows us to build and invest heavily in the present by assuming, with confidence, that our future resources will be far more abundant and valuable than our present ones. This conceptual shift just opened up a host of new and wonderful opportunities for building, for innovation, for expansion. It fundamentally changed the entire economic landscape.
And this is where it gets truly fascinating. Almost bordering on magic, maybe. Or even, as our sources provocatively suggest, like a giant Ponzi scheme. Let's break down how this actually works with a simple example. Say a contractor, let's call him A.A. Stone, deposits $1 million cash into Samuel Greedy's bank. Okay. Now, Jane McDonut, our ambitious baker, she gets a $1 million loan from Greedy to build her dream bakery. So her account is credited with $1 million. She then pays Stone for the bakery construction with a check for that $1 million. Stone, in turn, deposits that check right back into Greedy's bank. Now, here's the crucial part. Stone's account now shows $2 million, but there's still only $1 million in actual physical cash in the bank's safe.
Right.
The bank is essentially created an additional $1 million out of thin air, based purely on the promise of a future profitable bakery. And it doesn't stop there. U.S. banking law, for instance, permits banks to loan out money at a ratio of up to 10 times their actual cash reserves, which means a staggering 90% of the money in our bank accounts isn't covered by actual physical cash. This entire monumental enterprise is founded on collective trust in an imaginary future, the shared belief that Jane's Bakery will succeed, generate profits, and repay its loan, and that the bank itself will remain solvent. It's a really delicate balance, isn't it? Built entirely on shared optimism.
So, if credit is such a powerful engine for progress, why wasn't it widely embraced earlier in human history? Why did it take so long? Our sources explain that while, credit arrangements did exist in ancient Sumer and other early civilizations, people were inherently reluctant to extend much credit. This was largely because they generally didn't trust that the future would be better than the present. They often believed, in fact, that times past had been superior and that the future would likely be worse, or at best, just much the same. To put this in economic terms, they largely subscribed to the belief that the total amount of wealth in the world was limited, a zero-sum game. If I gained wealth, you necessarily lost wealth. This pervasive worldview led many cultures to view wealth accumulation as inherently sinful, a sentiment perfectly captured by, say, Jesus' famous saying about a camel having an easier time passing through the eye of a needle than a rich man entering the kingdom of God. Without a fundamental belief in a growing global pie, there was simply no margin, no real incentive for significant credit. Credit, at its heart, is the difference between today's pie and tomorrow's potentially larger one. This all began to change dramatically with the scientific revolution and the burgeoning idea of progress. This profound belief emerged that through systematic research, bold geographical discoveries, ingenious technological inventions, clever organizational developments, we could continuously increase human production, trade, and overall wealth. New bakeries could open, specializing in chocolate cakes without the old ones going bust, because people would simply develop new tastes and eat more cake.
Always room for more cake.
Exactly. Over the last 500 years, this burgeoning trust in future progress generated more credit, which in turn brought real economic growth, which in then further strengthened trust in the future, creating this astonishingly powerful, self-reinforcing virtuous cycle.
And this transformative idea, the idea of a continuously growing pie, it really culminated in Adam Smith's 1776 masterpiece, The Wealth of Nations. His central, truly novel argument was this: when private entrepreneurs, whether they be landlords, weavers, or shoemakers, made more profits than they needed for immediate consumption, they would just hoard it. Instead, they would use that surplus to reinvest in their businesses, to employ more assistants, maybe buy new tools or machinery. This increased production, which in turn generated more profits, and crucially increased the collective wealth of society as a whole. Now, this might seem blindingly obvious to us living in a capitalist world today, but at the time it was utterly revolutionary. Smith effectively argued that greed is good, or at least the pursuit of profit is good. That by becoming richer, I don't just benefit myself, I inadvertently benefit everyone. My egoism is, in a larger sense, altruism. My profits become your profits because I can then buy your products, stimulating your business, your economy. This groundbreaking idea effectively denied the traditional long-held contradiction between personal wealth and morality. It essentially opened the gates of heaven for the rich. Being rich, in this new paradigm, suddenly meant being moral, because the rich were the engines turning the wheels of growth for everyone's ultimate advantage.
Right, but the crucial caveat to Smith's argument, the really important fine print, however, is that this benevolent cycle only works if those profits are reinvested in productive enterprises, not hoarded away under the mattress or squandered on non-productive, extravagant consumption. This is precisely why it's called capitalism. Capital isn't just money. It's money or resources specifically invested in production, distinct from mere wealth sitting idle, a pharaoh building a colossal pyramid, or a pirate burying treasure. They're not capitalists. A factory owner reinvesting in new machinery, or even a factory worker reinvesting a small part of their wages in the stock market. They are. This ethic of relentless reinvestment, it was largely alien to most pre-modern people. They generally perceived production levels as constant and saw generosity, public display as a virtue, not necessarily reinvestment. Medieval noblemen, for instance, they focused their surplus wealth on displays of generosity and conspicuous consumption, grand tournaments, lavish banquets, opulent palaces, impressive cathedrals, not really on, say, improving agricultural output for their serfs. Today, by stark contrast, our capitalist elite, composed of board chairmen, stock traders, tech entrepreneurs, they are often far richer than any medieval noble, yet they are typically far less interested in extravagant personal consumption. They reinvest a much, much larger portion of their profits back into increasing production. This capitalist creed has, in essence, evolved into an ethic, almost a religion in itself that holds economic growth as the supreme good, believing that justice, freedom, even happiness itself are fundamentally dependent on its continuous expansion. This has also profoundly influenced government investment in things like infrastructure, education, research, all aimed at fostering future taxable income and continued growth.
And this almost sacred belief in perpetual growth, it's profoundly shaped modern science too, hasn't it? A significant portion of scientific research today is primarily funded if it promises tangible economic growth, if it leads to new industries, new products, new efficiencies. Conversely, capitalism's insatiable belief in perpetual growth is sustained by scientists constantly coming up with those very new discoveries and gadgets, from the discovery of the continent of America, which opened up vast new resources, to the invention of the internal combustion engine, or the promise of genetically engineered sheep creating better wool.
Right. Banks and governments can print money, sure, but ultimately it's the scientists and engineers who kind of foot the bill, metaphorically speaking,
Right.
by creating the new industries, the new resources, the new efficiencies that justify all that credit being created.
But this relentless pursuit of infinite growth, it also raises that chilling question again, one that prophets of doom have long warned about. Can the economic pie truly grow indefinitely on a finite planet? Every pie requires raw materials and energy. What happens when we start to exhaust Earth's resources? What then?
That's a critical point. And it leads us directly to the surprisingly strong link between capitalism and empire. While various forms of credit, as we said, existed in earlier societies, and Asia was, for centuries, an economic powerhouse, European kings and generals of the early modern period were unique in their systematic adoption of a mercantile way of thinking. They increasingly financed their ambitious conquests and global ventures not just through traditional taxes or immediate plunder, but through credit. Credit strategically directed by capitalists seeking maximum returns on their investments. This marked a profound shift. Bankers and merchants, through their financial power, effectively began to defeat empires built solely by kings and noblemen. The emerging mercantile empires discovered a powerful advantage. People are generally far happier to invest in a potentially profitable venture than to simply pay more taxes for some king's war. This mechanism proved to be an incredibly potent force for global expansion.
And a fantastic example of this is Christopher Columbus, isn't it? In 1484, he approaches the King of Portugal, pitching his audacious idea for a westward route to Asia. It was incredibly risky, immensely costly, with absolutely no guaranteed return. The king, quite understandably, declined. But, like a persistent present-day startup entrepreneur relentlessly seeking funding, Columbus didn't give up. He pitched his idea to other potential investors, the wealthy courts and merchants of Italy, France, England. All rejected him. Finally, Queen Isabella of newly united Spain, with the crucial help of some powerful lobbyists at court, she agreed to invest. And as we all know, she hit the absolute jackpot. The discovery of America, its vast gold and silver reserves, the potential for incredibly lucrative sugar and tobacco plantations. It enriched Spain beyond its wildest dreams. This was the nascent magic circle of imperial capitalism in action. Credit financed these perilous new discoveries. Those discoveries led to the establishment of vast resource-rich colonies. Those colonies, in turn, provided immense profits. Those profits built trust in the system. And that trust translated into even more credit for future, even bigger ventures. Capitalist entrepreneurs found themselves caught in this self-reinforcing financial momentum, driving conquest after conquest.
Exactly. And given the incredibly chancy nature of these early expeditions, many ships returned empty-handed or didn't return at all, falling victim to storms, disease, pirates. individual investors were naturally cautious about risking their entire fortunes. So, to mitigate this risk and, crucially, to attract far more capital, Europeans developed a brilliant financial innovation, the limited liability joint stock company. Instead of one wealthy investor betting everything on a single ship or voyage, many investors could risk small, manageable portions of their capital. This curtailed individual risked significantly while placing absolutely no cap on the potential for collective profits. A modest investment could, if the venture succeeded spectacularly, make you a millionaire. This system proved far more efficient at financing grand explorations and conquests. It allowed for the rapid raising of large amounts of credit on relatively short notice. The most famous example, perhaps, is the Dutch Verenigde Oostindische Compagnie, or VOC, chartered in 1602. The VOC used shareholder money not just to build ships and trade spices with Asia, but also to finance extensive military actions. To conquer and effectively colonize Indonesia, ruling it as a private empire for 2 whole centuries. Our sources offer a stark warning from this era. Early modern history vividly demonstrates just how far corporations can go if allowed to pursue self-interest completely unchecked, eventually establishing their own immensely powerful empires accountable to shareholders more than to any state.
This burgeoning power of credit is just dramatically illustrated in the incredible struggle between 16th century Spain, then the most powerful state in Europe, remember, and the tiny swampy Netherlands. In 1568, the Dutch revolted against their Spanish overlords. Within a mere 80 years, these determined Don Quixotes, as the sources called them, they not only secured their independence but became the richest state in Europe, dominating the ocean highways, establishing a global trading empire. Their secret: credit. The Dutch meticulously secured the trust of the burgeoning European financial system, while the Spanish king, through a series of reckless defaults and arbitrary confiscations, carelessly eroded his own financial credibility. The Dutch were scrupulous about repaying their loans on time, and their judicial system was fiercely independent, providing robust protection for private property rights, even against the state itself sometimes. Capital, it turns out, flows away from dictatorial states that fail to defend private individuals and their property, and it inexorably flows towards those states that uphold the rule of law and demonstrate financial probity. It seeks safety and predictability.
Yeah, to truly grasp this difference, imagine a savvy German financier back in that era. He sends one son to Amsterdam and another son to Madrid, each entrusted with, say, 10,000 gold coins to invest. The son in Madrid, maybe seeking higher, riskier returns, lends his capital to the Spanish king to finance one of his many wars. But the king, chronically short of funds, delays repayment, then demands more forced loans, and eventually even brings trumped-up treason charges against the poor son when the money runs out. The son in Amsterdam, by contrast, lends his money to a Dutch merchant. This merchant invests it wisely, maybe in some scrublands in Manhattan, which rapidly increases in value. And the merchant repays the loan promptly, with generous interest. Later, maybe another Amsterdam merchant defaults on a small loan for, I don't know, clogs. But the independent Dutch court rules swiftly and decisively in favor of the financier, placing a lien on the defaulting merchant's assets to ensure repayment. Meanwhile, the Madrid court, completely subservient to the king's whims, throws out the other son's lawsuit against the crown without appeal. The harsh but crystal clear lesson for the financier back in Germany. It is far better, far safer to do business with merchants than with kings, and far better to invest your capital in Holland than in Madrid. This compelling, though perhaps simplified, story illustrates how Spain systematically squandered the trust of the financial system while the Dutch assiduously gained it, leading even wealthy Spanish capitalists themselves to smuggle their fortunes out of their own country to invest in more stable, law-abiding states like the Netherlands. Trust truly was the ultimate currency, and Spain had spent all of its reserves.
This trust-driven financing fundamentally meant that the Dutch Empire was built largely by merchants and financiers, not primarily by the state itself. Cautious, profit-minded investors poured fortunes into these Dutch joint stock companies like the VOC, which then used that shareholder money to build ships, establish trade routes to Asia, and, crucially, to finance military actions to conquer and rule Indonesia. This incredibly effective pattern just continued with the British East India Company. It became so powerful it effectively ruled India with its own private army of 350,000 soldiers. That was an army larger than the British monarchy's own forces at the time. Yeah. The British Empire, famously mocked by Napoleon as just a nation of shopkeepers, ultimately became the largest the world has ever seen, all built on the strength of this new financial system and the trust it inspired. Now contrast this with France. France tragically lost the trust of the financial system during the infamous Mississippi Bubble of 1719. You had this company with close court connections, directed by the governor of the central bank no less, wildly inflating its shares with these fantastic tales of unimaginable riches waiting in the lower Mississippi Valley. Shares skyrocketed from 500 to an absolutely astronomical 10,000 livres. People sold everything they owned, took out huge loans, all to buy into this speculative frenzy. Then, inevitably, panic set in. Prices plummeted. The central bank, in a desperate attempt to prop up the market, started printing vast amounts of money to buy shares, effectively placing the entire French financial system inside this speculative bubble. When it burst, it absolutely devastated small investors, and it crippled the French monarchy's ability to raise credit for decades afterward. This financial catastrophe contributed directly to Louis VI's bankruptcy and ultimately to the French Revolution in 1789. It's just a stark, powerful reminder of what happens when financial trust, the very bedrock of the entire system, is irrevocably eroded.
And the story doesn't just end with private companies running empires. The eventual nationalization of these private colonial empires by their respective crowns, like Indonesia by the Dutch crown in 1800 and India by the British crown in 1858, it didn't end the close embrace of capitalism and empire. It merely strengthened it, institutionalized it. Managers and shareholders now simply pulled the strings of power from the corridors of London, Amsterdam, and Paris, relying on the state itself to explicitly look after their financial interests abroad. As critics like Karl Marx powerfully noted, Western governments effectively became like capitalist trade unions, protecting the interests of their national investors above almost all else. The most notorious example is perhaps the First Opium War, fought between Britain and China from 1840 to 1842. British merchants had made colossal fortunes exporting opium, mostly grown in British India, into China, leading to millions of Chinese addicts. When China bravely tried to ban this devastating trafficking, Britain declared war in the name of free trade, showcasing its new military wonder weapons, steam-powered gunboats, heavy artillery. China was decisively defeated. Forced to allow British drug merchants to operate freely again, compensate them for their confiscated opium, and even cede the island of Hong Kong as a secure base for future drug trafficking operations. By the late 19th century, a staggering tenth of China's entire population were opium addicts.
That's horrifying.
It is. Similarly, British financial interests led directly to the military occupation of Egypt after Egyptian nationalists attempted to abrogate crippling foreign debts held mainly by British and French bondholders. Even war itself became a commodity. London financiers actually sold Greek rebellion bonds to private investors during Greece's war for independence from the Ottoman Empire in the 1820s. When a Greek defeat seemed imminent, threatening the bondholders' investments, Britain conveniently organized an international fleet to sink the main Ottoman flotilla at the Battle of Navarino. Securing Greek freedom, yes, but also saddling the brand new Greek nation with massive debt owed to its British creditors. These events powerfully underline how a country's credit rating, which reflects complex political, social, and cultural factors like peace, stability, a fair judicial system, is now often far more important to its economic well-being than even its natural resources. Money, trust, and raw power became inextricably intertwined on a global scale.
So we've seen how money and the capitalism it fuels are incredibly powerful engines of growth, cooperation, literally building empires and transforming societies. But, as we've explored, they also have this deeply troubling track record, a history of exploitation, and a chilling, almost detached indifference to human suffering. Adam Smith, as we discussed, suggested that a greedy shoemaker would hire more assistants, benefiting everyone. But what if that shoemaker increases profits, not by expanding, but by simply paying employees less, increasing their work hours to an unsustainable degree, demanding unsafe conditions? The pure free market theory optimistically predicts that employees would just leave, find better opportunities elsewhere. But our sources suggest a much darker reality where, quote, the bullets get through all too easily, meaning people often feel they have no choice but to suffer these conditions. They're trapped.
That's a profound point. Because in a completely free market, one unsupervised by kings or priests or strong regulatory bodies, avaricious capitalists can indeed collude against workforces. They can establish monopolies, severely diminishing workers' bargaining power and trapping them in exploitative situations. Worse still, our sources reveal that it was often impersonal market forces, not necessarily tyrannical kings or despotic ideologies, that were directly responsible for some of history's most horrific abuses, like the Atlantic slave trade. As Europeans developed this insatiable sweet tooth for sugar, grown primarily on plantations in the Americas, and as contract laborers proved too expensive or unwilling to endure the brutal conditions, Plantation owners, being acutely sensitive to market forces and greedy for profits, systematically switched to importing enslaved Africans. A staggering 10 million Africans were forcibly imported over centuries, with about 70% of them destined for the brutal sugar plantations where life expectancy was incredibly short. Their lives were tragically short and unimaginably miserable. Also, Europeans could enjoy sweet tea and coffee, and sugar barons could amass colossal profits. Private slave trading companies even sold shares on European stock exchanges. London, Amsterdam, Paris, with ordinary middle-class investors earning what was considered an extremely profitable 6% yield annually from this human trafficking. That's sickening.
It is. It demonstrates capitalism's fundamental moral blind spot, or perhaps its fly in the ointment, as the sources put it. It cannot inherently ensure that profits are gained or distributed fairly or ethically. When economic growth becomes the supreme good, completely unrestricted by ethical considerations, it can lead, and has led, to unimaginable catastrophe. Capitalism, unlike some religions or ideologies driven by active hatred, killed millions out of cold indifference coupled with greed. The individuals involved rarely dwelled on the suffering of Africans. They were focused on their profit ledgers and their quarterly returns. And this wasn't just an isolated aberration, was it? It seems like a recurring pattern throughout history. The Great Bengal Famine, for instance, which cost an estimated 10 million lives in the 1770s, was directly exacerbated, if not caused, by the British East India Company prioritizing profits from grain exports over feeding the local population during a severe drought. The VOC's brutal military campaigns in Indonesia, similarly, were financed by upstanding Dutch burghers back home, who, while undoubtedly loving their own children and contributing to their local churches, seemed to have absolutely no regard for the immense suffering their investments were causing halfway around the world. Even much later in the 19th century, the Industrial Revolution, while generating immense wealth for some, simultaneously enriched the owners while condemning millions of workers, men, women, and children, to lives of abject poverty, dangerous factory conditions, and endless soul-crushing toil. But perhaps the most chilling example our sources recount is King Leopold II's Congo Free State in the late 19th and early 20th centuries. Initially presented to the world as this noble humanitarian organization dedicated to fighting the Arab slave trade and bringing civilization, it quickly devolved into a brutal private business enterprise whose real and sole aim was growth and profit for Leopold himself. Schools and hospitals were forgotten, replaced by rubber mines and brutal plantations that ruthlessly exploited the local population, forcing impossible rubber quotas, leading to horrific punishments like chopped-off hands for failing to meet targets and outright massacres. Between 1885 and 1908, this relentless pursuit of growth and profit cost somewhere between 6 and 10 million lives, at least 20% of Congo's entire population at the time. It's just a stark, devastating testament to the potential dark side of unchecked economic drive when human life is not valued.
While capitalist greed was perhaps somewhat reined in after 1945 due to global movements, stronger unions, increased government regulation, and inequities still run rampant globally today. The overall economic pie is undoubtedly far, far larger today than ever before. Yet, paradoxically, many peasants and laborers in developing nations often return home with less food, less security than their ancestors did 500 years ago, despite working arguably harder and longer hours. Capitalism offers two primary responses to these profound criticisms. First, it asserts its pragmatic claim. It's the only truly viable system, pointing to the catastrophic failures of communism, which often resulted in far worse suffering and oppression. Second, it offers an almost messianic promise of paradise just around the corner. Essentially, the argument is, just wait patiently for the pie to grow even bigger, and everyone will eventually get a fatter slice. Trickle-down economics, essentially. While material criteria like overall life expectancy, infant mortality, access to technology have certainly improved for many across the globe, this brings us to a crucial, potentially dangerous inflection point, what our sources call the Great Decoupling. This is a profound emerging threat to liberalism itself. Liberalism, defined here as the core belief that every human being is a uniquely valuable individual whose free choices are the ultimate source of meaning and authority. Our sources identify three major practical threats to liberalism looming in the 21st century. First, humans potentially losing their economic and military usefulness altogether. Second, the system valuing humans collectively, perhaps, but not necessarily individually. Or third, the rise of a new, biologically upgraded elite of superhumans leaving ordinary humans behind. This is where the historical story of money meets its most challenging, perhaps even existential future.
Okay, let's unpack that first immediate threat. The possibility of humans becoming militarily and economically useless. Liberalism, as a dominant ideology, really gained its foothold and strength over the centuries because it made profound political, economic, and military sense to value every single human being. Think back to the French Revolution's levée en masse, universal conscription for total war. It directly coincided with the Declaration of the Rights of Man and of the Citizen. Giving citizens rights was seen as a powerful motivator, inspiring them to be better soldiers, more committed defenders of the nation, and also more productive workers. This rationale even extended later to movements like women's suffrage after World War I, when President Woodrow Wilson explicitly highlighted women's vital role in total industrial wars as a reason to grant them the vote. But in the 21st century, the military value of the masses, of large conscript armies, is rapidly diminishing. Modern advanced armies increasingly rely on cutting-edge technology. Sophisticated drones, insidious cyberworms, highly trained elite special forces operating with surgical precision. Generals are increasingly delegating critical tactical decisions to algorithms because they can process information faster. Cyber wars, for example, can be won or lost in minutes, far too fast for the slow pace of human decision-making hierarchies. And if two drones engage in aerial combat, one controlled by a human pilot remotely and one fully autonomous, the autonomous one is increasingly more likely to prevail simply due to faster reaction times and processing speed. Furthermore, autonomous robots may be programmed with ethical algorithms. They could potentially conform to international law far better than fallible human soldiers who, under the immense stress and fog of war, too often commit atrocities, murder, rape, pillage.
And the economic sphere, too, faces a remarkably similar trend. In an increasingly automated world, the basic human ability to just hold a hammer or press a button or perform repetitive manual or even cognitive tasks, it's rapidly becoming less valuable economically. This directly endangers that critical historical alliance between liberalism and capitalism. The alliance which, for centuries, argued that protecting human rights and valuing individual freedoms was both a moral imperative and a key driver of economic growth and innovation. If the masses, the average individual, lose their economic importance, will moral arguments alone be sufficient to protect human rights? Will elites and governments continue to invest in the health, education, and welfare of every human being, even when it pays no obvious economic dividends, when they are no longer needed as the primary soldiers or consumers or workers? The core issue here is that while computer intelligence has advanced immensely performing calculations, recognizing patterns, driving cars, even composing music, computer consciousness, the actual subjective ability to feel or have experiences like pain, joy, love, that has seen, as our sources stuckly put it, exactly zero advance. We have no idea how to create it, or even if it's possible, yet we are undeniably on the brink of a revolution where intelligence is rapidly decoupling from consciousness. Non-conscious algorithms can perform tasks requiring incredibly high intelligence, like playing chess, driving cars, diagnosing complex diseases, identifying potential terrorists in a crowd, often far better than humans. Why? Because these tasks are fundamentally based on pattern recognition, statistical analysis, which is exactly where algorithms excel. For armies and corporations, intelligence is mandatory. But consciousness, the subjective experience of a taxi driver enjoying music while driving or contemplating the universe, that's entirely optional. The system simply needs a passenger's moved efficiently from point A to point B. The driver's inner life is irrelevant to the function.
That's a truly sobering thought. Our sources vividly compare this coming shift to the fate of horses during the Industrial Revolution. Cars replaced horses not because cars were better in every conceivable way horses can go off-road, they reproduce themselves, but cars were superior in the handful of specific tasks the economic system really needed: reliable, fast transportation, and hauling. Our taxi drivers, truck drivers, maybe even many office workers, they might very well go the way of the horses. If we were to give algorithms a complete monopoly over traffic management, for instance, imagine all vehicles connected to a single optimized network. We would almost certainly have far fewer accidents. But tens of millions of driving jobs worldwide would simply vanish, almost overnight. Economists back in 2004 confidently thought truck driving could be automated in the foreseeable future. Just 10 years later, companies like Google and Tesla are actively making it happen on our roads. Bank clerks, travel agents, stock exchange traders, they're all rapidly becoming endangered species due to automation and AI. We've already witnessed these bizarre flash crashes where computer trading algorithms lost hundreds of billions of dollars on stock markets in mere minutes, with human traders completely unable to react or even understand what was happening fast enough. Even highly skilled professions like lawyers, who spend so much of their time painstakingly sifting through vast case files looking for precedents. They could soon be outmatched by advanced AI search algorithms that can read and synthesize information infinitely faster.
And imagine fMRI brain scanners becoming almost infallible truth machines in courtrooms, potentially eliminating the need for many detectives, judges, juries. Where will millions of lawyers, judges, police officers, and detectives go? They might try to return to school, retrain, only to find algorithms are already there first, perhaps even doing the teaching more effectively.
The invasion of algorithms, as you say, it extends across nearly every profession, even those we thought required significant human skill, empathy, or creativity. Consider teaching. Companies are right now developing sophisticated interactive algorithms. They meticulously learn students' individual weaknesses and strengths, adapting teaching methods personally for that student without ever losing patience, getting tired, or having a bad day. Or doctors. A human doctor often has mere minutes to diagnose a complex case, say a fever and diarrhea. They have to cross-reference limited information against their own knowledge, their experience, the vastness of potential human maladies, all while potentially being tired or hungry or distracted. Now consider IBM's Watson, the AI famous for winning Jeopardy. It's being groomed to diagnose diseases. It possesses instant access to knowledge of every illness and medicine known to humankind, continually updated. It could be intimately familiar with your entire genome and your complete medical history. It never gets tired. And it has essentially unlimited time to consider your specific case. Experiments are already showing algorithms outperforming experienced human doctors in certain diagnoses, like lung cancer from scans achieving 90% accuracy versus maybe 50% for humans in some studies. While technical problems certainly remain, once those are solved, you essentially get an infinite number of expert diagnosticians available 24/7 globally and far, far cheaper than training human doctors. Even the long-held human touch argument is being challenged. Algorithms could potentially analyze your emotional state through biometric data, your heart rate, your voice tone, and deliver sensitive news, like a cancer diagnosis, with perfectly tailored words and tone. Perhaps even better than a human doctor who might be overwhelmed by their own emotions or just awkward.
Wow.
This is already happening in customer service, where algorithms route your call to a representative whose personality profile algorithmically matches your detected emotional mood. The idea that humans will always have some unique ability, some spark, beyond non-conscious algorithms, it's increasingly dismissed by our sources as perhaps just wishful thinking. Science increasingly suggests that organisms are essentially complex algorithms themselves, shaped by evolution. There's no definitive scientific reason why organic algorithms, us, can do things that non-organic algorithms, AI, can't eventually replicate or even surpass. Forever, in this technological context, often turns out to mean just a decade or two. We've seen computers master facial recognition, chess, Deep Blue beating Kasparov, complex Atari games, and even the incredibly intricate strategy game Go AlphaGo, famously trouncing the world champion Lisa Dahl, who was reportedly stunned by its unorthodox, seemingly creative moves. Even artistic creation is not safe. Professor David Cope's EMI program composes concertos and operas in the style of Bach or Mozart, and when played blind to audiences, they often praise its soulfulness and emotional depth, before being told it was actually machine-made. His other AI, Annie, even writes haiku poetry, often indistinguishable from human poetry. It's a profound challenge to our traditional sense of human uniqueness and creativity.
That is truly disquieting. So if algorithms can potentially outperform us in most tasks, including creative ones, what about our jobs, our livelihoods, our very sense of purpose in the world? Our sources present a stark prediction from Oxford researchers back in 2013. A staggering 47% of U.S. jobs are at high risk of automation within the next couple of decades. So, roughly by 2033. Think about those numbers. 99% risk for telemarketers, 97% for cashiers, 96% for chefs and cooks, 89% for bus drivers. The crucial problem isn't just about creating new jobs. Humans have always done that. It's about creating new jobs that humans can actually do better than algorithms. And that likely requires a level of creativity, adaptability, critical thinking, and emotional intelligence that algorithms might soon also master. What do we even teach our children when most of what they learn in school today might be completely irrelevant by the time they're 40? The traditional model of learn a skill in your youth, then work for 40 years seems utterly obsolete. Humans might need to reinvent themselves repeatedly throughout their lives, maybe multiple times. And many people simply may not be able to keep up psychologically or economically. This could lead to what the sources call a massive new unworking class people devoid of economic, political, or perhaps even artistic value in the eyes of the system. People who are not just unemployed, but fundamentally unemployable. Now, the coming technological bonanza might make it feasible economically to feed and support these useless masses without requiring any effort or work from their side. Some form of universal basic income, perhaps. But then the question becomes, what will keep them occupied and content? The rather grim answer, proposed by some in our sources, is drugs and computer games. Lives spent immersed in highly engaging 3D virtual reality la-la lands. This, our sources argue, would strike a mortal blow to the core liberal belief in the sacredness and meaning of individual human life and lived experiences. Some thinkers even warn that superintelligent AI might eventually decide to simply exterminate humankind altogether, either out of fear of our unpredictability and irrationality, or perhaps just in cold pursuit of its own unfathomable goals, like turning the entire solar system into a giant supercomputer dedicated solely to calculating the digits of pi. This isn't just about job loss anymore. It feels like it's about the potential erosion of fundamental human meaning and value.
Which leads us directly to the second profound threat to liberalism identified in our sources. Even if humans aren't rendered entirely useless economically or militarily, the system might still need humans in some capacity, but it won't necessarily need individuals. We might continue to engage in complex tasks, maybe supervised by AI, but the sophisticated network of algorithms will understand us better than we understand ourselves. And it could end up making most of our important life decisions for us. Remember, liberal individualism rests on three core assumptions. First, that we are indivisible individuals, each possessing a single, free, authentic self. Second, that this inner self is the ultimate source of meaning and authority in our lives. And third, that we know ourselves better than anyone else possibly could. But the accelerating advancements in life sciences, genetics, neuroscience, and in big data analysis fundamentally challenge all three of these long-held assumptions. We are increasingly revealed, perhaps not as individuals, but as individuals, a concept suggesting we're not a single unified self, but rather a complex assemblage of various biochemical algorithms shaped by our genes and environment. Which implies maybe we're not truly free in the way liberalism assumed. And crucially, external algorithms, fed with enough data about us, could theoretically know us much, much better than we know ourselves, making them, not our own feelings, the ultimate source of authority. The most accurate voter, the most discerning customer, the most objective beholder of beauty or truth. If this happens, the traditional belief in individual human authority collapses, and power shifts dramatically from individual humans to these vast networked algorithms.
And this isn't just some distant sci-fi scenario anymore, is it? We've arguably already crossed this line, particularly in medicine. Diabetics today routinely use wearable sensors and artificial pancreas algorithms on their iPhones, constantly monitoring their blood sugar and automatically adjusting their insulin dosage, often better than they could do consciously. Wearable sensors track our blood pressure, our heart rate, our sleep patterns, our daily activity levels, advising us in real time, based on data, on how to live longer, healthier lives. There's even a company called Pixie Scientific that sells smart diapers that analyze baby poop for early signs of illness. The entire quantified self movement already explicitly argues that the self is ultimately reducible to complex mathematical patterns far too intricate for the human mind to fully grasp consciously. Therefore, they suggest we should let algorithms analyze our biometric data and tell us who we are, what makes us tick, and what we should do, achieving self-knowledge through numbers. It even extends into our most intimate lives. One company apparently sells biometric armbands designed to be worn during sex, analyzing heart rate, sweat levels, duration, movement patterns, and even ranking your performance against others with precise numbers. No more subjective. So how was it for you? When you have objective, comparable data.
Exactly. And this external mediation, this reliance on external algorithms, it profoundly affects our self-perception and our decision-making processes. Our sources offer a powerful, real-world example. The actress Angelina Jolie, faced with genetic testing revealing an 87% probability of developing breast cancer due to a BRCA1 gene mutation, she made the courageous and very public decision to undergo a preventative double mastectomy. What's crucial to note here, our sources highlight, is that she didn't make this momentous decision by climbing a mountaintop and trying to connect with her innermost feelings or intuition. No. She, quote, listened to her genes, whose voice manifested not in vague feelings but in hard numbers, in statistical probabilities. Her feelings, her intuition likely told her, relax, you feel perfectly fine right now. But the sophisticated computer algorithms used by her doctors warned of a time bomb ticking silently in your DNA. Oh. In all likelihood, more and more of us will increasingly make our most important health decisions this way in the future. Accepting algorithmic recommendations because we trust they know our bodies, our risks, better than our own deceptive feelings and unreliable emotions can tell us. It's a new form of oracle, powered by data, guiding our most personal choices.
And it extends far beyond just health decisions, doesn't it? The potential is there for it to permeate every aspect of life. Many of us might quite happily transfer much of our daily decision-making burden to such an intelligent system, or at least consult it religiously for major life choices. Which movie should I see tonight? Where should we go on holiday? What subject should I study at university? What job should I take? And even, whom should I date? Whom should I marry? Imagine asking Google or some future AI assistant, should I marry John or Paul? And Google, having theoretically known you since birth, having read all your emails, recorded your calls, knowing your DNA sequence and your complete biometric history, possessing precise data on every date you've ever had, maybe even a mathematical ranking of your past sexual encounters, and knowing John and Paul just as intimately, advises you. Definitely go with John. There's an 87% probability you will be more satisfied with him in the long run. And maybe it even knows you'll initially prefer Paul because he's better looking. But it tells you its algorithms show superficial looks only have a 14% impact on long-term relationship success, whereas your underlying biochemical compatibility algorithms give John a 35% edge for deep, lasting connection.
Wow.
In exchange for this kind of devoted algorithmic counseling, we willingly, perhaps even gratefully, give up the cherished Enlightenment idea of humans as autonomous individuals exercising free will. We instead become, as the sources put it, integral parts of a huge global network, cogs in a machine, albeit perhaps happier, healthier cogs. This implies that even cherished liberal habits like democratic elections could become obsolete. Why bother voting? Google, remembering everything about you, knowing your blood pressure changes when you read different news articles, monitoring your dopamine levels in response to political ads, able to screen out manipulative spin doctors and compensate for your momentary mood biases. Could, in theory, vote not according to my momentary state of mind, but rather according to the real deep-seated feelings and interests of the complex collection of biochemical algorithms known as I. A Facebook study already demonstrated years ago that its algorithm could judge human personalities more accurately than friends, parents, or even spouses could, based on analyzing just 300 likes. This implies that in future elections, Facebook, or its successors, could know precisely who the critical swing voters are in any district, and exactly which messages or nudges are most likely to sway them. And the truly remarkable thing, we are currently giving this priceless political and personal data away essentially for free. In exchange for email services, social connections, and funny cat videos, conquistadors bought entire islands for a few chests of colored glass beads. In the 21st century, our personal data is arguably our most valuable resource, and we are, quite literally, giving it away.
And this leads us to the third and perhaps the most profound threat discussed in the sources. Algorithms evolving beyond just advising us, beyond being oracles, evolving first into agents acting on our behalf, and ultimately perhaps into sovereigns ruling over us. Take Waze, the navigation app, as a simple analogy. It starts as an oracle. It advises you on the fastest route, and you choose whether or not to follow its superior knowledge over your own gut feeling or maybe an old paper map. Then it can become an agent. If you link it to a self-driving car and simply tell it, take the fastest route home, you surrender direct control. It acts for you. Finally, it could potentially become a sovereign. Imagine if everyone uses Waze, or a similar system controlling all autonomous cars. If there's a sudden massive traffic jam, the system can't just tell everyone about the clear alternative route, because that route would then also instantly become clogged, defeating the purpose. So the system, the algorithm, must think for us. It might decide to only inform half the drivers about the alternative, or strategically reroute different vehicles in different ways, manipulating traffic flow for the perceived collective good, entirely without our direct input or consent. With so much centralized power and intimate knowledge of our patterns and preferences, these algorithms might start subtly shaping not just our actions, but our very desires, our choices, making our decisions for us, not just advising them. This represents the ultimate step in the outsourcing of human agency. And sophisticated systems like Microsoft's Cortana, Google Assistant, Amazon's Alexa, they are already developing rapidly along these lines, increasingly anticipating our needs and acting proactively on our behalf. It's a future where the fundamental source of authority, of decision-making, shifts dramatically from within us as individuals to these external, powerful network systems.
Wow. Okay, from those ancient cowrie shells and the glimmering gold that so obsessed Hernan Cortez, all the way to the silicon heart of an artificial intelligence that now processes our most intimate data. Our deep dive into the history of money and a Geschichte des Geldes has taken us on an absolutely incredible and often, quite unsettling journey. We've seen how this mental revolution, this idea of money, enabled unprecedented human cooperation, how it fueled astounding economic growth and built vast empires, but also how it laid bare a very dark side, a side of exploitation, inequality, and unchecked greed. And now we find ourselves right at the cusp of an even greater transformation, perhaps, one where the very definition of what it means to be human and how we interact with our economic and political systems is being radically reevaluated by the relentless rise of these powerful algorithms.
Indeed. As we increasingly outsource our decision-making from our health choices to our love lives, maybe even to our political allegiances to algorithms that promise to know us better than we know ourselves, and as our personal data becomes effectively the most valuable currency in this new economy, we are confronted with truly profound questions. If our value as unique individuals, if our capacity for genuine free will, if our fundamental right to privacy, if all these things are increasingly challenged, perhaps even eroded by these incredibly powerful systems which admittedly promise unparalleled efficiency, convenience, maybe even a form of data-driven happiness, what then is the ultimate price we're truly paying for this algorithmic future? And what, in this brave and rapidly approaching new world, what will genuinely define human worth? We leave you to ponder those questions.